one of the characteristics of modernism is that the soul is turned completely outward and cannot live with itself. You always need something to occupy you. We have lost our sense of love of the quiet.
Dr. Nasser, I have to begin by saying I'm a huge admirer of yours. I'm a huge, huge admirer. I'm honored, truly honored that you could join us on Reflections today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm also very glad to accept your invitation. And I'm also very glad to know such a gifted young Muslim musician, one who especially now moving and with very sturdy and strong steps towards the expression of the heart of Islamic art of music in a contemporary setting. And I pray for you to have the greatest success in doing so, because traditional music, especially if it's kept pure, is one of the most important means in our world today for the expression of the truth. There's oftentimes a mental and intellectual opposition to the theological and philosophical formulation of the truth, whereas the music penetrates the heart. And even Western people, some of whom consider themselves to be atheists, when they listen to the pure and unadulterated form of Persian or Arabic or Indian music or any other traditional music, it goes right to their heart, and they have very deep appreciation of it. So I pray that you could continue to cultivate this very important art for which God has given you so much gift.
Thank you so much. I'd like to speak with you today about the environmental crisis. Since we're both in parts of the world where the coronavirus is once again increasing, I'd like to start by asking how you see this pandemic in the larger frame of the ecological upheavals the world is experiencing.
I already wrote a little piece in Sacred Web when the pandemic began. It was called epidemic at first, now called pandemic, and also did an interview with a Jewish rabbi from Jerusalem, which has been very widely distributed, in which I speak about the spiritual dimension of this crisis. So those who wish to turn to this issue more extensively can do so through these two sources. But let me say that, of course, it's a tragedy of a large scale, but it also can be an occasion to learn very profound lessons. First of all, the fragility of the world, which Islam emphasizes so much, and the Quran, one of its major messages, is the brittleness, fragility, ever-passing nature of the world, is evanescence, the lack of permanence, which we see around us, but we don't want to accept. And we feel that we're in terra firma, solid ground, and this world is so real. And a little bug, which we cannot see, changes all of the different equations and calculations of modern civilization. This is the first important lesson to draw from it. And to allow, not only allow, to force us to be more humble. The great sin of modern man is hubris. In a sense, since the Renaissance, modern man has substituted himself for God. He still talks about God, but we now live in a homocentric rather than a theocentric universe. Modernism, I mean, parts of the world which are so traditional, that's something else. But it's an occasion to remember, as I said, really how weak we are. Where is this mighty science of which everybody speaks that was supposed to solve all the problems of the world? I'm not saying that science is not correct to the extent that it deals with certain domain of physical reality, right. But this idea that ordinary people have of the almighty nature of modern science, that it can solve any problem, there is for everyone to see. And I hope, therefore, it will be an occasion for an ethical and spiritual correction. Secondly, one of the characteristics of modernism is that the soul is turned completely outward and cannot live with itself. You always need something to occupy you. People put wires in their ears when they go for a walk because they cannot do without music from the outside. There's no music inside their soul, so they have to listen to artificial music through wires as they walk. You've seen all of these things. We have lost our sense of love of the quiet, of contemplation, of being alone. Because ultimately, when you're alone, you're always with God. Whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, whether you're conscious or not. And that's why fallen man runs away from himself. And the less spiritual inclination there is in human beings, the less is there this love to be by oneself, to go inwardly. Now, the external situation is forcing that to a large extent, not completely, but to a large extent upon us. So let's hope that will be a period of self-discovery. Let's try to find out who we are. Don't run away from ourselves. And to discover oneself is also discover the spiritual world. It is not accidental that you know so well, you know Arabic so well. Man arafa nafsuhu faqad arafa rabbahu. The famous Arabic saying of the Prophet ﷺ, he who knows himself, his nafs, his soul, knows his Lord. And this perhaps is an occasion for the reality, a realization of the reality of this saying. Thirdly, the crisis caused by the virus is not at all as dangerous for the future of humanity as the environmental crisis, which now people have forgotten somewhat. But paradoxically, this crisis of the coronavirus is helping the environment. You now see wild animals coming into towns, suburbs, or even into cities. There were some pictures of it. A picture of wild animals in Sweden and England even coming into towns. And I know myself, I live in the suburbs of Washington, you know where I live. And the number of foxes who visit us has increased a great deal. We give them a lot of food every day. And then the number has increased, birds have increased. It's a very interesting response of nature to the suffocating stranglehold that through machines, through modern industry, man has put on the body of nature. And therefore, it can be also a freeing moment. And perhaps once the corona crisis is over, we shall learn not to go back to our old habits. An area which I used to drive about 35 minutes where I live, and I can now do in 10 minutes. The roads are somewhat free. I'm not saying that it's going to stay like that, but let's hope there'll be an amelioration. This idea of, as they say commonly, putting all our eggs in one basket, that is, having all our hopes, all our aims towards a materialistic and bodily comfortable and rationally explainable and already non-wondrous and without mystery reality for the world and our life in the future, that this will change a great deal. I don't think the world will ever be the same. I think the self-confidence that Western civilization and modernism and its spread into other continents and countries of the world had of itself, although it's trying to put on a good show, will never be the same. Especially in Asian countries, where modernism was first beginning to come, at least first, I mean, a century old in comparison to the West, first beginning to come since the last century. It began 5 centuries before or ago in the West. Let's hope that, inshallah, we will learn these lessons, and there are many other lessons that will not take your time because you may have other questions to ask, but that we will learn these lessons which are spiritual, ethical and moral, intellectual, and also physical, and having to do with the natural world in which we live.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nasser. In fact, my next question is related to the previous question. In your opinion, what are the roots to the environmental crisis? What are the roots of it?
As you probably know, in 1966, Lynn White, an American scholar of intellectual history, wrote an essay called The Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. Became very famous, and he laid the blame at the foot of Christianity to a large extent, and certain strands of thought that Christianity had inherited from the Greek world, the Roman and Greek worlds, the Greco-Roman world. 6 months before that, I gave the Rockefeller Citizen Lecture at the University of Chicago, which came out as the book, The Encounter of Man and Nature, and later on Man and Nature, that has become very popular again in the last few years.
It's a masterpiece. I have it, of course.
It's a masterpiece.
You have it, yeah. Yes, it's translated into, I wrote it in English, it's translated into French, other languages, Portuguese and so forth, Spanish. And it's interesting, it was one of my very last books to be translated into Persian. Of 20, 30 books in Persian. It was one of the very last because the interest in the environment came to the East from the West. The roots of the environmental crisis are actually, I believe, to be found in modern civilization. I know those who have written against what I've had to say because I was the first person to have spoken about this globally, seriously from a historical point of view before Lynn White, that, goats were eating trees in Syria 2,500 years ago. If goats had been continued to be eating trees in Syria, and we would not have steel mills in Liverpool, you would not have had the environmental crisis. They would still be eating the lower branches of trees, the goats in Syria. This is an absurd extrapolation, you might say, from these small events of animals doing this or that to what has happened in modern times. Yes, the rise of agriculture, the settlement of people perhaps 10, 20,000 years ago, at least 10,000 years ago, from being nomads to sedentary people, was a stage in which some part of nature was destroyed by the creation of small towns and so forth. But the remarkable balance that was got between the population and the countryside, this, what we see today, cannot be seen as simply an extrapolation of Babylonia in the millennium before Christ up to New York. That's not correct. There's something much more profound that takes place. Secularization of nature, the desacralization of nature, and the idea of Francis Bacon that the role of man is to conquer nature. It's a very, very major transformation that takes place. And so the roots of the environmental crisis are to be found, yes, some elements in days of old, but most of it, with the rise of modernism and modern science, and then later on technology in the 19th century. It's true. The Greek religion decayed into what's called cosmolatry. That is the worship of the cosmos rather than of God. And a kind of naturalism that began to dominate late Greek philosophy. Christianity, born into that world, had to confront this particular problem, and so set itself against this. And early Christianity did not pay much attention to the spiritual quality of nature. Although there were some, like Origen, who did speak about